Hello? Sorry about that. Can you hear me, Bastian?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great, great. Sorry about that. It's time, so we can start. Go ahead and, but before we jump into our conversation, let me play a video that is for 2 minutes, and we will continue from there. Let me just share my screen. You can see my screen, right? All right.
Close your eyes. Open them. What do you see? Do you see despair, or do you see beauty and hope? What do I see? I see the future. I see almost 1 billion young people, and I see them playing a huge part in the next technological revolution, the 4th industrial revolution.
4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. Just so long, SpaceX will make more rocket engines than the rest of U.S. production combined.
Now let's talk about iOS.
Yes, it's iOS 13.
Self-driving car technology that sounded like science fiction just a couple of years ago is now a reality.
Imagine Africans being masters of industry. Do you see it too? You probably don't. Honestly, we still have basic problems to solve.
Now, many African countries are regularly troubled with moderate to severe power outages.
I think Africa's infrastructure deficit is approximately $90 billion every year for the next decade.
Africa needs infrastructure.
But what if we decide to see technology, artificial intelligence specifically, as a way to solve basic problems more efficiently? Look at my good friend Charles. He's always been passionate about tackling birth asphyxia. He built Ubewa, an AI mobile app that helps to diagnose birth asphyxia in 10 seconds. Orita and Paris, who grew up around smallholder farms that struggle to get loans from banks, they built Farm Drive in Kenya to help smallholder farmers obtain great credit scores, all from a mobile application. Or Desmond, who just wants to feed the world from Africa. His complete farmer app uses AI to detect pests and diseases early and even allow anyone to invest and manage their own farm from a laptop. How about these solutions to our basic problems, huh? Are you seeing what I'm seeing yet?
It's now or never, Africa. We invariably missed out on the first 3 industrial revolutions. We can't gamble with the 4th one. We shouldn't. Artificial intelligence is not an afterthought. It's a workable solution to our most important problems and an enabler for our bright future.
Close your eyes again. I hope you see it now.
Beautiful. I hope you've enjoyed it, and you can find it on our website if you want to see more of these videos about Alliance4ai and what a big impact AI is going to create in our continent. So today we have a special guest here, and I'm not going to go ahead and let him introduce himself and where he's from. And yes, Bastian.
Yeah, thanks, Edosa, for organizing this and having me. Yeah, I'm Bastian Blankenburg. I'm a co-founder of a Kenyan startup, or it's technically more like a Mauritian Kenyan startup called Utu Technologies. I'm a PhD in computer science, German originally, grew up in Germany, went to school there and to university in a town called Saarbrücken, which is not very well known. It's in the southwest of Germany. There's a university there that is good for computer science, and there's also a couple of other research institutes in the area. One is the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, which is where I worked as a researcher for a couple of years, and then started doing a PhD there as well. So that was in the topic of game theory and using that for multi-agent systems. Multi-agent systems are basically a distributed system paradigm where we assume that we will have many independent parties working together over a network, and each one trying to basically achieve some profits or whatever they're up to on their own. That was all before blockchain, by the way. So back then we needed to look at each protocol separately and determine the properties and stability in an open setting and things like that. So so that's what I concerned myself a lot with, game theory, uncertainty mechanisms like fuzzy reasoning or possibilistic reasoning, financial risk measures, also privacy preservation. So how can we work together in a network world and achieve optimal results with unknown parties without disclosing everything that we might want to keep private? A topic that also gets more relevant. Anyway, okay. After doing that, I went to industry because I got a bit tired of academia because of different reasons, and worked for a company in Berlin called IVU, which is making public transport planning software. And that was an interesting experience just from the perspective of learning how software industry works, or software for industry works, rather. I was a project engineer for some time, working in places like Saudi Arabia or Italy, UK, Ireland. And then later again, switched to the development department, became basically a programmer, built some stuff there that was deployed for a couple of thousand users. And then I moved to Kenya because of private developments, basically. So my wife is Kenyan and is from here, and she was here. And then we basically decided to move here because I had, of course, visited her a couple of times and seen that there's this awesome tech community in Nairobi who are generally trying to do great stuff, meaning that from my perspective, coming from Berlin, where everybody's basically solving first world problems, such as order your pizza with one click less or things like that. So I found it very inspiring coming here and seeing, okay, here are people who are actually trying to solve real problems and making livelihood better for farmers and things like that. And and then I met my co-founders with whom we first started a company called Maramoja, which is a taxi app. Can talk about a bit about that later, and that then ultimately evolved into Utu, or co-founding Utu.
Beautiful, beautiful. That is quite an experience, and it's a pleasure having you, Bastian. Thank you so much for doing this. Again, let's get into it, right? As Utu, today you came here as a representative of Utu Technologies, and let me ask you a question. Would you say you are one of the world leaders in the work that you're doing? And can you explain why you think you are or you're not? Because clearly from what I'm seeing, it's, I'm curious to know.
Well, we certainly want to be, but we are not quite there yet as like being the world leader, I would say. I mean, okay, in different ways, maybe it depends how you look at it. So maybe I should talk a bit more about what we're actually doing. So when we started that taxi company that I mentioned, we figured out that, okay, actually in Kenya and similar places, we don't really have only the problem that Uber and the likes are solving, like how do I find any taxi? because being in around CBD here at night or whatever, you wouldn't just jump into any taxi. You would want one where you could be reasonably sure that that one is okay and you're not abducted or something. And so basically the problem is finding a trusted taxi and not just any taxi. And therefore we developed this mechanism where we offer people different drivers and then we show them whether these drivers are actually liked by any one of their friends or family or generally known people. So we started asking people to sign up with Facebook and give us access to their phone book to figure out who knows whom. And then we learned when we mentioned this to investors and others that, yeah, that's actually required in a lot of different sectors, not only for taxi. I mean, basically anything where you would ask a friend or a trusted person to recommend you something, like, I don't know, you buy a new car, a new make, and you have not owned that before, so you need a new mechanic. So who do you ask? Probably your friend who has the same make of car and things like that. So so that's why we then founded Utu as the technology company and focus on this trust recommendation mechanism by itself. So we are now offering this as what we call trust infrastructure for the on-demand and sharing economies. But basically any marketplace, well, online marketplace, say, can be served by that mechanism. And in the course of that, we are also then developing algorithms, for example, to identify the most relevant recommenders, because when we started, we were a bit skeptical, like, okay, how many people do we actually get signed up that know each other or know a lot of people on the platform? But people are really well connected, and you actually get quite a fast-growing social graph pretty quickly. So just with, even when you start out, even your first couple of hundred users, you can probably assume that some of them will actually know each other, and so that's pretty cool. And then over time, you learn, of course, also about more about connections between them, and then you add more sources where you're getting the social connections from, and then you learn more about that as well, and so on. And so sooner or later, you get to the problem that actually not do I know anybody who can recommend something, but you have maybe like 20 possible recommenders, and then you don't want to show all that to the user on a small screen I mean, that would basically clutter the user experience. And so you have to make a choice. You have to identify what are the most relevant recommenders here, looking at the context, like, for example, for the auto mechanic, the context is, for example, the make of your car and maybe your preference of price versus quality and things like that. And then basically find somebody that you know, who you trust, and particularly trust for this particular decision. So so you need some similarity matching, some context analysis, and then that's where the whole AI comes in. When you say, are we leaders? Well, I mean, we are leaders in the sense that I think, as far as I'm aware, we are the only ones building a general purpose trust platform like that. There's some other companies who build trust as a product, or they build maybe some similar mechanisms, but it's restricted to their own vertical, like we started with the taxi app, rather than offering this generally. And so I think, yeah, in that sense, we are. There's another sense where maybe we might be, I'm not sure. Basically, there are a lot of companies, particularly in the West or in Asia also, that are using big data analysis and using machine learning and data science for solving problems where they have a lot of data. That's not always the case for us. So when we start out onboarding a new platform, then we might not actually start with a lot of data that we have, and so we can't just have just deep learning, and then we first need a massive marketplace with millions of users before we can actually show anything. So that's not our approach. Our approach is more like we are using some classical methods, AI methods, like similarity matching, like cosine similarities, clustering, things like that, to work with smaller data sets at first, and then only add machine learning over time when the system grows and we get more data.
That is beautiful. That is really fantastic. And I'm glad you brought the idea of AI into the conversation, because I'm going to bring it up as well. So as Alliance4ai being advocates for AI, and seeing AI startups like yours growing into the African continent, it's really very rewarding and amazing to see. I just want to ask you a question, and more of there might be audience people who here who might be new to AI. If you could just shed a light on um, why you're using AI and the challenges of using AI, specifically in the continent, and uh, how people usually portray AI as being a huge thing. And of course, it can be a huge thing, but also it can be used in a very simple use case as well. So if you could just share us a light on that, it would be really amazing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there are many dimensions to that problem, so to speak, or to that field, say. Yeah, in principle, there's of course a lot of data available about almost everything. The question is just how accessible is that data. So, for example, I mentioned that, yeah, in the beginning when our platforms start out, then they might also be startups and they might not have a lot of data. So that's one thing. But the other thing is you might actually have a platform that actually has data, and maybe a lot of data, because they have been in the field for some time, for years.
Yeah.
And we also have such clients, but then some of them don't actually have that data online. So that data exists like in written books, like transaction books, whatever. And now, so far, they didn't have too much pain using using it this way, because they were not really scaling anything new or whatever. But now they try to do this, and then all that data needs to be brought online or digitized in the first place, and that can be difficult. I mean, you can of course hire a lot of people who just start typing all the data. You can also try to use OCR technologies, and the machine learning for OCR has been has made great progress over the last couple of years as well. So so that's definitely worth doing or trying. It's not always that great anyway, because some of this handwritten data is rather messy. So you have inconsistencies how the format is between different entities. You have inconsistencies within the one book itself, and then you have a lot of things where people make notes that might be obvious to somebody who's who's in the domain, who has domain knowledge. But for general OCR algorithm, that might not be obvious at all. And even for people like us who are not necessarily domain experts in our clients' domains, might then also be difficult. So, I mean, basically the data intake, digitization, and that is the first hurdle. Then another one is, I don't know, where you hear about talent shortage a lot, basically. I mean, even I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of Africans generally who are really into machine learning, and we have really a great young community in Nairobi, but also in other places like Addis and others around the continent where people are really getting into this. And we have some awesome junior developers also from Akira Chicks, for example. Big shout out here. I really like what they are doing and the people who joined us. But then more senior or experienced people, that's of course where it gets a bit thinner. And and a lot of those are actually, maybe even if they are from Africa, they might be in the West. They have studied in some Western universities and are still there or something like that. That definitely is also some percentage. But I mean, we are kind of lucky. Unfortunately, our head of data science, Dr. Alex Mwai, could not join us here. I had asked him to talk more about the data specific stuff, because that's more his domain rather than mine. And then head of machine learning, Brian Muya, is also very well known in the tech community in Nairobi, because he does talks about some topics sometimes. So these are awesome people who we just happened to come across and were able to hire, because yeah, I think we have a great story of what we are trying to do and what we are trying to build, and yeah, so that might help convincing people working for us. But generally, yeah, probably there's a shortage, even if we ourselves did not have that problem so much so far.
I see. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely something to look at. With that being said, just moving into the next question, and maybe this one kind of involves everyone as an audience, as Alliance4ai, and also as Utu Technologies and individuals as well, AI innovators in Africa.
You're breaking up for me, Edosa. Not sure if it's me or you.
What do you actually really need?
Sorry, Edosa, I did not get that question. You were breaking up for me.
Yeah, just break in the middle. I'm sorry. I was saying, as part of Alliance4ai, as Africans, and generally speaking for the audience, what do you actually, as an AI innovator, as an AI startup in Africa, what's your expectation for the people, for the government, the investors, so that you can actually move forward with the solutions you have and scale up and become obviously the top level companies in the continent and in the field as well?
Yeah, okay, that's a big one. I mean, yeah, that is actually at least two big topics. Yeah, what should people and governments do? I mean, governments basically, of course, can do a lot in the realms of regulation and making it not too hard, basically, for AI startups to come up and grow. I mean, it's often the case that deep tech startups, rather than just applying tech startups, need to figure out their business case and find the product market fit and possibly even test out whether the product is that would fit the market is feasible to develop at all. And so things like the Kenyan government introducing this digital transaction tax, for example, is just not a good thing, because you are not paying for profit, you are paying for any transaction, and that just can kill a lot of efforts instantly, because in the beginning it will simply not be profitable, and then you still have to pay for your losses to the government, basically. So so that's not a great idea. In the terms of other regulations, I think yeah, the task forces that have been done around the continent regarding blockchain and AI, as has done in Kenya also. That's a good thing if something tangible comes out of it. Yeah, we are still basically seeing what they are now doing with the results. Well, first of all, they created a sandbox for fintech startups and some things there. So that works partially for some, not for all. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not really an expert in regulations and stuff. I just feel that, okay, some rules change and that makes it harder or more difficult for us, but definitely those rules better, and governments can actually do a lot of making it easier for such startups here. And they should, yeah, look at that from this perspective, building up the industry rather than how they can extract something from an industry that is basically very nascent and it's very small yet. Okay, so I think it can become really big, but at the moment it's small, and yeah, the governments shouldn't try to extract stuff from there. Maybe later. Anyway, the other thing, what people should do generally, I mean, I can only encourage young people and computer science people in general, specifically, to take up AI, things AI.
Yeah.
But I would also advertise to not only look at the currently still hyped machine learning stuff, but also at the more classical fields of AI, like logic and things like that, because even though machine learning has made the most visible advances, say, I mean, all the examples in the video were basically driven by machine learning advances.
Yeah.
So definitely, yeah, there's a lot of glamour and hype there right now, but at the end of the day, it still has also a lot of problems. So basically, for example, explainable decisions by AI is still unsolved in the realm of machine learning. There have been some research advances, but nothing really practical yet. And also transferring models, machine learning models from one use case to another is also, yeah, it's a highly researched topic, and advances are being made, but it's also totally not solved generally. And we feel this very much because Utu has this approach that we are working with pilot clients to develop models for them first, and then trying to extrapolate the general methods from there. So we do a lot of feature engineering, or even abstract feature engineering, where we say, okay, here we feature engineer this, and for that client we feature engineer that. So what's the common things that we did there, and can we actually automate that, and things like this. So we are also working towards some sort of meta learning things. And for this stuff, it is very important to basically know your basics about abstractions and algorithms, classical algorithms, logic, and things like that. Yeah, so definitely for people wanting to get into the field, I mean, starting with the machine learning stuff, that's great, do these courses, but also look a bit beyond that machine learning into other AI realms, definitely, I think. And then you asked about investors, and investors is a big topic. That's not only about AI, but generally investing in startups here. And then there's also a discussion going on why in places like Kenya, for example, startups with white founding teams, as Utu is also, get more investment from foreign investors than black startups, basically. And there's some people working on things that might be done about that from the community in which we are also involved. But at the end of the day, I guess, I mean, investors are the ones who make the decisions. So we need basically to communicate to them that, there's this whole ecosystem of young, smart Africans trying to start companies and solving problems in Africa, and just invest in them. I mean, of course, you need to make you have your decision making in place, but you need to probably build networks or things like that, because I don't think that most investors are outright racist and they say, like, I only invest in white startups and not in black founded startups. No, I think that's not how it works. I think in the first place, they need to meet the black founded startups, and they need the networks to do this, because most of these introductions happen via personal introductions, like somebody is connecting somebody with email or other channels, and so basically they already know each other. And and then there might be a disconnect between some of the local startups and investors in the West. The second half of this problem is that there's actually a lot of investment money in Kenya, but it's mostly invested in things like real estate and classical stuff rather than startups or even AI startups. So trying to get some of the local investors to become basically angels or VCs, that's another thing. But of course the difficulty there is that the investment works pretty differently. If you're investing in real estate or an AI startup, the risk function is completely different. The market is completely different. So just because you are a great real estate investor doesn't mean that you will be a successful AI startup investor. So Yeah, I mean, there's also some initiatives running now. There's some local angel networks being founded, and that's great. I might also add that in other African countries, it's very different. So, for example, Nigeria, there's a lot of Black-founded Nigerian native startups that are getting a lot of investment. It's actually the vast majority in Nigeria is local Black-founded startups rather than expat or white-founded startups. And yeah, I don't really understand why Nigeria is like that and Kenya is like this. Some theories that people have around this, but yeah, it's a very complex and big topic, and
yeah, like it's really important, and that's why I even brought up the question. And thank you for giving your insights on that. And that's why we're even working together, having these webinars, and trying to show the way of how it's actually done. Because at the end of the day, as an Alliance for AI, we want to see the solutions become a big companies and solve problems that we have in the content. And thank you for mentioning that as well. I hope everyone is getting something from this, and it's also practical. It's not just theoretical, just like he mentioned earlier about machine learning and the other fields that we have in AI. So it's a very nice thing that you actually touched on that. While we're continuing this conversation, we've pasted a Menti link on the description. Go to the link, and using the code, there are 2 simple questions that we've typed that's related to what we're talking right now. And if you could just answer them while me and Bastian still continue the conversation, it would be really nice. You can find it on the chat section. That being said, it's really impressive on what Utu is doing so far and how far you've come. That kind of makes me curious on how you're thinking of the next 5 years. What's your vision in the coming 5 years? Where do you see Utu technology? And also, what's the best thing that could happen to you?
Yeah, okay, the best thing that could happen for us is pretty easy. Basically, all the developments that we are doing right now are working, and we are making this product very successful. But of course, yeah, the path there is not so easy. So one thing that we are working, or that we have been working on since 2018, is also developing a blockchain component of our protocol. And that's a pretty important bit for a couple of things. One is that we would like to provide trust, or let's say, yeah, trusted information to people for the right thing at the right time, but we don't really want people to have to trust us, it's ourselves as the company, too much. I mean, of course, in a way you have to trust us when you're using the platform, but if you can reduce the amount of trust, then that would be great. So, for example, if we tell you that your friend so-and-so likes this auto mechanic, then we could lie, right? That information might be correct or it might not. And if we are just a closed platform, then the only thing that you can really do is basically call your friend and ask them if they really recommend this auto mechanic. But of course, the idea was in the first place that you don't have to call your friend, that you get this information seamlessly, and you don't need to go to that extra trouble. So putting endorsements like that on the blockchain, on the public blockchain, enables people basically to verify the correctness of what we are showing themselves. So that's how the blockchain idea initially started, but then we added a lot of layers on top of that. And there's actually there's a question in the chat here, for example, about fairness and bias in AI, or ethics for using the technology, and that's a very important topic for us. So we want to basically use the blockchain managed parts to enable people to fully specify themselves what they allow us, but also other services on the platform to do with their data. So, for example, if people give us enough data so that we can make these context sensitive decisions, as I explained earlier, obviously we need a lot of data for that. Yeah, we need to know sort of people's preferences and what they have and who they know and all that. And that's a tall order to ask people to just give us this data. So we built this platform to rather allow people to exactly say, okay, you can use this data for this purpose, but do not show it to this group of persons or things like this. And then they will actually be rewarded for that. So you can decide what data you show, and you can also decide ultimately what it will cost users, such as our own platform, but also maybe other services on that platform, to use that data. And then those rights can also be retracted at any time. Of course, once you have sent some piece of data to somebody, then it's out there. Yeah, then you have to basically trust them to not misuse that data. So if you allow who to use the fact that you own a Toyota car only to show like Toyota related recommendations to your friends, but you do not allow us to sell this information to advertisers, and the next day you are swamped by spam email from Toyota outfitters or whatever. So you need basically to trust us to not then actually send on this data. And of course, yeah, that's a problem that cannot actually generally be solved, at least not with technology that is readily available right now. So yeah, there are some things that are more difficult than others, but this basic mechanism of implementing the way for people to specify what can be done with that data, that's definitely something we are building. And there's a lot of other problems around this, like how do you make the UI about this understandable and easy to use? Because if you give a lot of flexibility around this to people, then that also means that it's a very complex rule system that you have that is maybe not easily understood by everybody. So so you need to invest a lot of research into UX and UI and how you actually make this work so that it can be used by not only technical users but by basically everybody and things like that. Yeah, then bias in AI is another big problem, and it's also a big problem particularly with machine learning. There's some discussions around this. I mean, okay, there have always been discussions around this since years, basically. Yeah. But the latest development, I mean, you've probably all heard of GPT-3, the language model that was recently released, or is, I think it's not openly available. I need to apply for a beta access or something. But yeah, there's also stuff like, for example, just today or yesterday, somebody posted on Twitter, if you challenge GPT-3 with 2 Muslims, for example, then it generates all sorts of texts that have to do with terrorism and violence and whatever. And there's not a single example that the system generates, which is just, you know, if you just write 2 people or something. So that's pretty scary. And then nobody understands these big models, right? Because they've been trained with huge amounts of data. I guess the data that was chosen to train GPT-3 was probably also automated in some way, and so nobody really knows what's going on there inside that model. And yeah, and that's a big problem. And I think you cannot easily solve that. In my personal opinion, basically every system is biased in some way. You just need to choose your bias consciously, so to speak. So, I mean, if you just train some algorithm on general data on the internet, then, I mean, most of the internet is still heavily biased towards Western things, or the Chinese internet, of course, to Chinese things. That's just the history of how the internet grew. It was developed in the US, and then it grew from there. And then for a long time, 90% of websites were American websites, and now it's different. And there are more islands, so to speak. But for example, the amount of African information compared to US information is still tiny, basically. Yeah. And so if you don't sort of push your algorithms to specifically look at African sources, for example, then you would just get a heavily biased model out of it, because that's what you put in. But yeah, then some people are saying, yeah, it's just about the data you're feeding and not about the algorithm itself, which I'm not so sure. But the thing is that with machine learning, it's kind of difficult to really figure these things out. There's also something where classical AI methods like logic can help better, in my opinion, because you understand much better, or Bayesian networks, for example, you understand much better what the actual rules are, how the system actually reasons, and therefore also what problem with biases you might have and how you might counter it.
Impressive. That's really fantastic, Bastian, and thank you for giving us that insight. As we're hearing Bastian, if we could finish the Menti polls, and also if you have any question, we can take one more question for Bastian. You can just type it on the chat, and as they are doing it, is O2 Technology hiring currently? Are you hiring in any positions? This can be a good platform to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a bit difficult. So we just closed a financing round right now, basically, like yesterday, literally, and that was a bit difficult because of COVID times. So we were actually raising a Series A round which was supposed to close in March, and we had the round fully committed, and then COVID hit, and it all fell apart because we had like 2-3 investors pulling out, and then that made everybody else think, and then more investors pulled out, and so on. And then we restructured the round and tried to raise a smaller round, not like a Series A, but basically to bridge this time, which was also quite difficult to close in this time, and we just managed just now. So, and with the amount we now raised, we haven't adapted yet our hiring plans to it completely. So that's a bit long-winded answer to say I don't know yet exactly.
All right.
But if we are not hiring right now, then we will probably be hiring very soon, hopefully again. And I mean, yeah, definitely apply to us. Can always apply to us. It's sometimes we do job posts, but if somebody applies to us whose skill set we definitely will need in the course of what I described, what we are trying to do, there's always a chance that we might say, okay, this seems to be a great fit, so can we make this work somehow?
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Bastian. Let me share my screen now and show you what the audience have been saying to the 2 questions that we've asked. The first question was, what do you want to know about AI? These are some of the comments that people have put down. And it's just something to look at, and some things that people have taken from the conversation we've had. And this was the second question about what other AI startups do you want us to feature. And we can see people know different startups in the continent as well. So it's something to look at. Yes, so it's just to show you what the audience has been engaging and kind of take note of what people think about AI in general, AI startups in the continent. Thank you so much, Bastian, for making time for this and having to talk about all the things that you guys do and all the vision that you have in the continent. You've inspired me, and I hope you've inspired everyone in the audience. And that's what we're all about. I just keep mentioning Alliance4ai. Just to give a kind of overview of what we do, we're a non-profit organization who are basically advocates for AI. We try to help startups, early AI startups, innovators in in Africa to become the elite innovators on the continent and succeed, right? And we do this by providing different resources and by connecting these individuals and startups to big resources that can help them scale in their startups and even grow individually using AI, because we have seen the potential, and Utu technology can be a very good testimony to this. So definitely be on the lookout. On the chat section, there is also a link for signing up for the newsletter, which is really important that you should sign up if you want to get more information about Alliance4ai and generally get resources around AI. And most of the resources come through our newsletter and on social media as well. So make sure to tag us at Alliance4ai on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, any social media platform. Again, thank you so much, Bastian, and thank you everyone for signing in. It was great having you, and hopefully we'll have you again some other time. Thank you so much. Have a good evening and good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Pleasure.